Today we're going to talk about the faction which seems to be the most popular for many of you, and that is the Yellow Sign. So, the Yellow Sign sets up here in Europe, where their symbol is. Now, a lot of you guys in these videos have probably noticed all these other little symbols we have on the map. These are all for the benefit of Yellow Sign, which is, why they're yellow. And we're going to talk about those today too. So first, Yellow Sign set up here. They get their gate. They get their 6 cultists. Yay! And they're ready to roll. Now, their special ability is tied up with these markers, which are desecration markers. Okay? They mark whether an area is desecrated or not. You're the only faction that desecrates or gets benefit from it. Now, other players, first time they play, they often ask, what does the desecration marker do to me? And the answer is nothing. It doesn't hurt the other players at all. Now, it might hurt the humans who live on Earth, but, what do we care, right? So the desecration markers, your special ability is called Feast, and it means that if you have a unit in an area with a desecration marker, you get 1 power out of it during Gather Power. Now, if you have a desecration marker in an area that doesn't have your units, you get nothing. So, for example, if you have desecration markers like this would give you a power during Gather Power. This wouldn't. So sometimes the enemies are benefited by driving you out of areas where you have the markers, just so you can't get the point. Desecration markers cannot be removed. They stay on the map forever. They just accumulate. Okay, so your units. 6 cultists like everyone else, and then you also have 6 undead. See how adorable? They're not really zombies. They have bandages on them like a mummy, and then there's tentacles, and the guy's got a 14-inch long tongue, so I guess the ladies love him. And they're very nasty looking undead. Then we have 4 Byaki. Fabled as the mount used in the festival. And they all, now, unlike most factions, they have, undead. The undead and Byaki have a peculiar combat ability. The undead cost 1. Their combat is 1 less than the number of undead in the area. So if you have 2 undead in an area, the combat value is 1. If you have 1 undead, the combat value is 0. If you have all 6 undead, the combat value is 5. Byaki are sort of the other way around. For each, you have a total combat, they cost 2, and your combat is equal to 1 more than the number of Byaki in the area. So if you have a single Byaki, the combat is 2. If you add another Byaki, the combat goes up to 3, and so forth. So if you have all 4 Byaki in an area, the combat is 5. Same as if you have all 6 undead. In general, you get the most combat oomph if you keep your Byaki spaced out 1 per area, so each rolls 2 dice, and if you clump the undead together so they get to roll the most possible. You're the only faction, among the starting factions that gets 2 great old ones. You have the King in Yellow, who has a combat of 0 and costs 4. To summon him, you must have a unit in an area without a gate. He's key to all of your strategies. You have a lot of strategies, but they're all based on using the King in Yellow. So, the first moves we always see Yellow Sign do is the first move every time is they move one of the cultists to an adjacent area, Scandinavia, North Atlantic, whatever. Let's say North Atlantic. And then his next move is spend 4 power, get the King in Yellow, because the King in Yellow must be summoned in an area where you have a unit, but there is no gate. This means if this is a rare game where near the end of the game the entire map is covered with gates, you can't summon the King in Yellow anymore. I've seen that happen like once ever, but keep it in mind. So you gotta have a unit in an area that has no gate. Then there is Hastur. Hastur costs 10 power to summon, and to summon him you have to have the King in Yellow in an area with a gate you control. Then you spend 10 power, Hastur appears. Rar. Hastur's, now the special abilities of each of these guys, King in Yellow, like I said, has 0 combat. He's a great old one, but his main function isn't battle, obviously. His special ability is that he makes the desecration tokens. To do it, he has to roll a die. The die, the result, he spends 2 power and tries to do a desecration. His chance of success is equal to or less than the number of units he has in the area. So for example, if he tried a desecration here where he has 3 units, he'd have to roll a 3 or less. If he was all alone in an area like this, he'd have to roll a 1 or less. If he succeeds, he places the desecration marker in the area. Now, whether or not he succeeds, he may also place any unit that he controls that from his pool that cost 2 or fewer points. So, for example, he could place a Byakhee, and this is even if he fails. So he might roll his dice, he doesn't get a 1, but he places a monster. Then he rolls the dice again, he doesn't get a 1 or a 2, so he places a monster. Then he has to roll again, 1, 2, or 3 if he fails, or this time let's say he succeeds. Well, he gets another monster. One of the results of this is that he rarely pays for a monster. Almost all of his monsters are placed on the map through failed or successful desecrations. Now, if he has a cultist in his pool, he can place that instead of a monster, and sometimes he gets to do that. So that's how he is. He generally accumulates the monsters. You may ask yourself, why would I ever get an undead instead of a Byakhee? Well, here's why. He has a spell book that makes the undead particularly useful with the king in yellow. So sometimes he picks undead, and of course the Byakhee is simply a way better monster, so sometimes he picks the Byakhee. Okay, Hastur's special ability. His combat is equal to the cost for a Ritual of Annihilation. So it starts at 5 and it goes on up to 10. The result, his special ability is called Vengeance, and what it means is when he rolls combat dice, under all other circumstances, the defender picks which results apply to which unit. So, for example, if you are fighting these guys here, and you inflict 2 kills, the defender can say, well, I don't want to kill my Nori, he's really expensive, so I'll kill the 2 cultists instead. Okay, but Hastur gets to pick where the hits rolled by his side go. Not just the hits Hastur rolls, all the hits from his side. So if Hastur got 2 kills in this fight, he can say, well, I'm putting 1 on the Nori. Or he can say, I'm putting 1 on Nyarlathotep or Cthulhu, or whoever you want. So he is really lethal fighting against enemy Great Old Ones. Because he can, if you get a single kill, which he's likely to get since he's rolling 6 or 7 or 8 dice, then he will knock out the enemy Great Old One right there. So sometimes players think of him as the assassin of the gods. So he looks frightening, he is frightening in the game, everyone's afraid of him. Let's talk about how he gets his spellbooks. Okay, the first spellbook he usually gets is the one for Awakening the King in Yellow. He awakens the King in Yellow, he gets a spellbook. Next, we're going to talk about these glyphs, these desecration token glyphs. There's 3 different kinds of glyphs on the map. There are these little hash mark ones, it looks kind of like a cursed forest. These glyphs are found in Asia and Europe. Then there's these chevron-shaped glyphs. These are found in Africa and Australia. Third are what we call the dragon glyph. It's kind of like a curved dragon or a circle or something. These are found in the Americas. Now, when you place a desecration token in an area marked with one of these glyphs, for example, you place one in the chevron glyph area, you get the spellbook for the chevron glyph. So you can see on this map there's the dragon, the chevron, and the what I'm calling the hash mark, but it's more like a forest maybe. So you only get that the first time you place it on one of those areas. So then I place another desecration in this other area with a chevron, or in Australia, you don't get an extra spellbook. You've already placed one of the chevron. So what this means is, because you have to get a spellbook, you have to place a desecration in each of the different glyph areas, the Yellow King has to go on a march around the map, trying to hit all the 3 areas that have the glyphs. So that's kind of a task on the King in Yellow. So he's following his own drummer, he's wandering around on this little jihad, destroying things. Okay, he also gets a token, which is an interesting bribery sort of thing. He says, as your action for a round, choose another player. That player gets 3 doom points. You generally don't want to do this too early in the game because you don't know because you always want to give it to the player who's furthest behind so it won't hurt you too much. So you pick the guy who's a little behind. Sometimes you can use it to bribe someone to say, hey, I really need to go to Africa to desecrate it. If you promise not to attack me when I go there, I'll give you the 3 doom points. So you pick the player, you give him the 3 doom points, and you get a spellbook. You can do this at any time, first turn if you want. Although I do not recommend that. Finally, there's the spellbook you get for Awakening Hastur. Now, when you get this spellbook, you also receive an Elder Sign. So it's a little bit like when Great Cthulhu awakens a Great Old One, he gets an Elder Sign. But with Hastur, it only happens the first time you awaken Hastur. You get an Elder Sign. You never get another Elder Sign. If Hastur gets killed, you have to awaken him again. You don't get another Elder Sign. So that's how that works. Okay. Let's talk about the spell books that you get. Okay, Passion. when one of your cultists is eliminated from play by any other player's action, okay, then you get 1 power. So for example, if they capture your cultist, you get a power. If they kill your cultist in combat, you get a power. If Cthulhu devours you before combat, you get a power. If you're killed by Groth from the Black Goat's ability, then you get a power. So killing your cultist gives you power, so you don't really mind when they die. Well, you mind a little bit sometimes because it's awkward, but it's almost helpful. Okay, next, Zingaya. This is an action you can take with your undead. If you have undead in an area that has enemy cultists, like this for example, let's say there's some undead here, you know, maybe the king in yellow's there, and here are some enemy undead. Zingaya, you spend 1 power, the enemy has to choose one of his cultists to be turned into an undead. In effect, your undead have infected him. Okay, so in this case, White would no doubt pick this cultist because he doesn't want to lose the guy at the gate, and you'd get an undead. It costs 1, same as a undead costs, but hey, you didn't need a gate, you just got him, and plus I got rid of one of his cultists, so it's really good. Then, on a later turn, if you didn't do anything about it, you could do it again and convert this guy to an undead. Now in this case, I happen to have a cultist in the area, so once the cultist is removed by being Zingaya'd, you can march on top of it. Note that you can do this even without a Grey Old One. Like here's an area where the enemy is guarded by a monster, so you can't capture it, but you don't care, because you can just bite him, turn him into an undead, and look, now you have the gate. So it's sort of like a zombie movie with spreading with people well, you know, we don't know if Zingaya is a bite or what, but maybe it's just bad breath, but it still is pretty awesome in the way it removes enemy cultists. Okay, the Byakhee. Byakhee, I have the spellbook Shriek of the Byakhee. This is an action that costs 1. It lets you move any or all Byakhee on the map from their current area to one selected area. So for example, let's say we have Byakhee here and here, and we have a cultist here all by himself, being lonely, and suddenly the Nori comes to eat me, maybe with some cultists backing him up. I can spend 1 power and move 1 or both Byakhee here from anywhere on the map. Say they're over here, far away. Oh no, I need defense. Spend 1 power. Boink. There they are. So that's a handy emergency ability. It lets you move your Byakhee across the entire world. You don't, of course, have to have a unit there. Say that he is bold enough to have units there without an undead. You can spend a point and move Byakhee there. Now he's defenseless. I mean, without a Nori. And you can capture them or do whatever horrible things you want to do with your Byakhee. Okay, now, the Screaming Dead is kind of a signature spellbook. He doesn't always use it early in the game, but he probably does 85-90% of the time. What the Screaming Dead was, now there's 2 different ways that Yellow Sign can get 2 moves in a row in the same action. This is one of them. What it is the king, okay, so it's move the king in yellow. So just move him to an adjacent area. Any undead with him, move with him for free. So for example, say the king's here and he's got a couple undead from previous desecrations. He spends 1 power, he moves here, the undead go with him for free, and then, immediately afterwards, he gets to do another different action. In other words, you can't do 2 Screaming Deads in a row. You also can't do the He Who Is Not to Be Named ability. We'll talk about that in a second, as your second action. But you could move him, and then you could recruit a cultist here, or build a gate there, or what it's usually used for is you move and then you desecrate, or try to. Or sometimes you move and immediately capture a cultist. So for example, you can do Screaming Dead like this. You spend 1 power, move him here with his 2 undead, and then you spend 1 more power for your second action, it's capture a cultist. So that's an extremely useful ability, and it's used a lot, especially since you can use it to move and then immediately spend 2 more power to try to desecrate. Quite often what happens is that players, when they're desecrating, like if the desecration fails, they'll place an undead. When the desecration succeeds, yay, then they'll place a Byakhee. And the reason is because the undead can't move with the king using Screaming Dead. So this way they leave the Byakhee behind to kind of guard the desecration token. And each turn during Gather Power, the guardian Byakhee will suck a point of power out of that for you. And then the king can go on his way and leave a guardian behind for the desecration token. And this all lasts until you need your Byakhee because you're using Screaming the Byakhee. Okay, so Hastur, it's got 2 spellbooks. One of them is He Who Is Not to Be Named. This is sort of in parallel to the King in Yellow's Screaming Dead, and the way it works is Hastur, he spends 1 power, it's an action. Most of Yellow Sign's spellbooks are actually actions. So he spends 1 power and moves the Hastur to any area on the map that has a cultist of any faction. The idea is that the guy said his name. So here he is, he spent 1 power, boop, there he goes there, there's a cultist there. It's not his, it doesn't matter, the guy said Hastur. Okay? And then, after this, again, just like Screaming Dead, you take a second different action. Except you can't take the Screaming Dead for your second action. That keeps you from chaining them together to make your other players throw you out the window. So your second action can be capture cultist, attack, whatever you want. One of the clever combos you can do if you have all your spell books as Hastur is, let's say that someone on the map you really hate, like Cthulhu. Okay? So, well, let's give Cthulhu a cultist. I don't seem to have a green cultist handy. We'll just pretend that that this is a green cultist. So Hastur uses He Who Is Not to Be Named to immediately move from wherever he is to here where that cultist is. Okay, that costs 1 power. Then he immediately gets a second action. Well, he doesn't want to just fight Cthulhu by himself because he might get killed and he costs 10 power. So his second action is Shriek the Byakhee. He moves any Byakhee on board there with him. That only costs 1 power. Then, if he has all 6 spellbooks, he can immediately declare combat as an unlimited action, because every faction can do that. So for 3 power, he's gone there, he's got some guards to take hits for him, and he's got enough dice to kill you, and even if the other guy has a whole bunch of guardian units, Hastur doesn't care, because he picks where the 6s go. And if he rolls a single kill, I guarantee you it's going on Cthulhu, or on Nyarlathotep, or on Black Goat, whoever it is. So Hastur is greatly to be feared in the late game. The final spellbook, I said Hastur has 2 spellbooks and he does, but this final spellbook is actually partly the King in Yellow spellbook. Here's how it works. If Hastur is in play, the cost of desecration, which of course, as you recall, the King in Yellow does, is only 1 instead of 2. It's half price. So all of a sudden you can desecrate a lot easier. But even more important, if the desecration succeeds, you get an Elder Sign. So you can walk around the map and each time it's your turn you spend 2 points. 1 to move, 1 to desecrate, then you get an Elder Sign and a monster. Then you move, desecrate, Elder Sign, move, desecrate, Elder Sign. So you can really rack up the Elder Signs this way. Typically during the course of the day, Yellow Sign doesn't really have very many gates. They usually have the fewest points on the Doom track that are visible, but they have a big pile of Elder Signs, and that's how they win. So other players have to keep an eye on kind of the sneak victory by Yellow Sign. So that is Yellow Sign. Lots of terrible things they can do. They suck power off the desecrations that are moving around the map. They are moving twice in a row all the time. Remember, the second action you take after doing Screaming Dead or He Who Is Not to Be Named doesn't have to be in the same area. So you could, for example, He Who Is Not to Be Named over here, and then for your next action, build a gate or something. So you have lots of choices. That's Yellow Sign, one of the most popular factions, very popular here. He's a little bit more complex than he's probably the most complex of the starting 4 factions, so usually the first time someone plays him, they don't win. But they figure him out really fast. The second time you play, you know what to do. I will say this isn't always the case. Just played the game about 7 times in Poland, and one of the first time Yellow Sign players spanked the rest and totally dominated them. So that's how it goes. Thank you for listening.